I call Julianne Genta.
Tēnā koe. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start my contribution to this debate by talking about values and what I in particular value and the Green Party and why I stood for the Green Party. Because what we value is a world where our climate and our environment is protected for the long term, where people are able to have meaningful work and able to live happy, healthy lives. A world where there is peace. And this is not unrealistic. This is something that we could create. With all of our knowledge and our technology, human civilization should be able to achieve this. And trade could and should be part of achieving this, of protecting our environment and protecting people and achieving a peaceful civilization. But it currently is not. And why is that? It's because along with trade has been the exploitation of natural environments, the exploitation of poor people, all for the benefit of some very wealthy investors. And it will continue to happen this way if we don't stand up and say, we want a better world. And I know that most New Zealanders agree with this and would like to live in a peaceful world, would like to protect our natural environment, and would like to live in a society where everyone has a fair go and we don't have increasing inequality. But the national government is letting us down, not only because their policies aren't achieving this, but because they are not even facilitating an open and frank debate about their policies. The TPPA, we haven't had a proper debate about this. And anytime anyone raises significant concerns about the provisions in the TPPA and how they're going to make it more difficult for us to protect our natural environment, to protect the public health of our people, to even protect the interests of taxpayers when it comes to the cost of medicines, we are accused of being anti-trade. Well, let me say right here, right now, I have no problem with trade. We believe in trade. We want trade agreements that protect the things that matter most to us in this world. And that is our children's future. That is the water that they should be able to swim in and drink. And that is the air that they breathe. That is the climate that we need to be looking after. And I know that those National Party members understand this because their government signed up and ratified the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement says we cannot keep doing business as usual. We have to change how we are doing things. And yet the TPPA is very much about protecting business as usual. Our three main concerns about the provisions in the TPPA are the ISDS clauses, that's the investor-state dispute provisions, which give investors the right and ability to sue governments simply because they have legislated in the interest of protecting the environment or public health. That's the truth of how these ISDS clauses work. 70% of all the ISDS clauses, all the ISDS cases that have been taken have been about environmental regulation. And there are countless examples of these. For example, when the German government tried to phase out nuclear power after the Fukushima disaster in Japan, it got sued for 6.2 billion New Zealand dollars by a Swedish nuclear energy company. When the state of Quebec decided it didn't want any more gas fracking, oil company Chevron sued the Canadian government for almost $400 million. Chevron also used ISDS to sue Ecuador because Chevron was trying to get out of a previous ruling that said it owed billions of dollars to Ecuador for polluting the Ecuadorian environment. So anyone who cares about protecting the environment in the long term will have concerns about the provisions in the TPPA, which are effectively giving foreign investors the right to potentially sue future New Zealand governments for regulating in the interests of protecting our environment. I haven't heard a single National Party member stand up and give any defense of this, Mr. Chair?
Julian Genter.
It's not just the environment. If we care about public health and the ability of future governments to pay for medicines, then we should be concerned about the copyright provisions in the TPPA, which could affect the ability of Pharmac to negotiate affordable prices for medicines. In fact, the National Party has already admitted, John Key's already admitted, that it will cost us more. Maybe it won't cost New Zealanders more when they go to pay for it at the pharmacy, but it will cost New Zealand taxpayers more because we're going to have to pay more for those medicines. How is that in the interests of New Zealand? It's definitely in the interests of the big pharmaceutical companies in the United States. They're some of the most profitable companies in the world. Their margins are incredible. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be looking to get a better deal for our exporters. We absolutely should. But what we've got in the TPPA is simply not worth the cost, the way this trade agreement has been written. And it's not just the Green Party who's raising concerns about this. The EU Trade Commissioner, who's in the middle of negotiating the TTIP, which is an Atlantic version of the TPPA, said, "We want rule of law, not the rule of lawyers," and is calling for ISDS reform. The Australian Productivity Commission, set up by John Howard, recently came out strongly against investor-state dispute clauses because of the unquantifiable financial risk to governments. They said, ISDS creates potentially large, unfunded contingent liabilities dependent on decisions by international arbitration tribunals and substantive appeal rights to foreigners not available to domestic firms, risk impeding domestic regulatory reform, lack transparency, and have inadequate parliamentary scrutiny. So the concerns that the Green Party has are not about trade. Let that be clear. We are concerned about the ability of New Zealanders to use their democratic right to regulate, to protect in the interests of the environment, in the interests of public health. And I think that is a perfectly legitimate concern to raise, and it's a debate that should have been had here in New Zealand. We should have been talking about that. Not everyone who raises concerns about the way this has been drafted should be castigated as being completely anti-trade or against jobs in New Zealand. I mean, honestly, in the government's own analysis, it shows that the TPPA is likely to lead to a loss of jobs in New Zealand. So again, what we see here is a pattern. And that pattern is that law is being made in the interests of the few, in the interests of the powerful, in the interests of those who are already benefiting from the status quo. And we know we want something different and something better, and we have every ability to create that for ourselves. And so for all the young people out there in Aotearoa who want a peaceful world with a stable climate and a fair society, I say to you, you can make a difference. Get involved in politics. Get involved and help us create this fairer society and better world. Because these people in power aren't going to do it for us.
Mr. Chair.